another draft physics video presentation. Comments. And mostly going to be on the subject of the exchange of momentum and the consequence of redshift. And that's really what's happening, and there's interactions that cause the redshift, and it happens when light is received or when light is produced. Obviously, when the receiver's doing it, they're not really changing the frequency, and when the producer is doing it, causing it, or the thing emitting light, it's really creating it. So the two things are different, but it's exactly the same phenomenon in inverse relationship to each other, in terms of, you have to think of it in terms of the motion of the objects when they have more than one motion, in a sense. Alright, anyway, throwing baseballs off moving trains, kind of thing. Anyway, so that subject will come up. I wonder if Monk and his people get all their understanding about particle physics. Again, let's understand, when they say the words particle physics, it's just such a lie, because they don't believe in particles. They believe in ambiguous, mushy things that don't have positions. How can a particle not have a position? That's a ghost. That's not a particle. And time, from having watched the movie Interstellar twice, question mark. The fact that the movie Interstellar is an embarrassment to physics, the fact that a physicist who got the Nobel Prize was a consultant on that steaming pile of crap, is just amazing. I mean, it's just amazing that physicists aren't so embarrassed. I mean, the whole wave thing was just so idiotic. The whole idea of the 30-year, time dilation, that somehow they could travel through 30 years of time dilation in 5 minutes, is absolutely preposterous. Okay, you can't do that. Time dilation happens because you're either accelerated or you have an insane velocity. You have to have insane acceleration or insane velocity. Where was that in the movie? Oh, that's right. It wasn't there. There were no G forces, like 700,000 Gs. They never experienced any of that. How can you do 30 years of time dilation without experiencing intense G forces? Preposterous. Absolute crap. Anyway. It seems to be the extent of their understanding. Well, it seems to me that they just want to believe, and so they'll accept all kinds of errors in the accurate description. This is like talking about some dead character of history, and they're just apologists. Well, Candy loved his wife, and he didn't really sleep around, and blah, blah, blah. They're just making excuses and just ignoring the glaring facts. Just horrible. Alright, moving forward in reverse. Whatever that is, I don't know what to make of that, so I'll just say, whatever. It's just poetry. It's too few words. There's no point in trying to say too much with too few words. There's just no point in it. Use the words. Use them accurately. As accurate as you can. I think what Mr. Monk is trying to say is that the hydrogen atom is flying towards a frequency of photons. It's hitting these photons at a faster frequency or at a blue shift. Well, again, it can't change the frequency that the photons are actually coming at. It can only interpret them differently. Can't change them. So the emitter can make the frequency. The receiver can just distort. Okay, it can't change what it actually is. It hits the photons with a blue shift. So, in a sense, you're just conceding the argument. If moving towards the photons blue shifts them, then moving away has to red shift them. So you can't have it both ways. You can't say, I'm denying the existence of the cause of redshift when it's moving away, but it does cause blue shift when it's moving towards. Come on. Or at a faster frequency. So when it holds the photons with a delay, it ejects them out of the back, it's not redshifted, it's just back to normal, the original frequency, because it was receiving the photons at a faster frequency. First off, it doesn't really receive them like we do. It's not perceiving the frequency, it's not measuring the frequency, so it's not in any way changing the frequency. You can say it would if we were perceiving it. If we were sitting on front of the hydrogen atom, we might perceive it that way, but as I just pointed out, how we perceive it is our error, not that we change the photons. The delay in the supposition of motion just normalizes the frequency. Well, I'm arguing that you can't do that with a piece of paper. You can't diagram that. It won't work. It doesn't work that way. So your theory would work, but the atom would need to hit for short periods. No, the longer it stays in the atom, the more redshifted it's going to be. So you can have it stay, as I'll diagram it, for the entire length of time of the wavelength. And that makes things simpler to draw anyway. So I'll draw it. Yeah. The superior mind made some comment about, yes, you can just draw this, and I'm saying, well, yeah, why can't I draw it in a way you can understand? So I'll try to draw it in a way you can understand. Like if the hydrogen atom was moving somewhat perpendicular so that it would not influence the whole ray, rather just a little fragment here or there. Well, I'm arguing that the perpendicular interactions frankly just aren't as regular, and there would be no redshift that could mean anything. They can't change the frequency because it's in the wrong direction. So all they could do is distort the photon in terms of slightly changing its position, its angle of movement. So it could cause some aberration, but it's not going to cause a change in frequency. Alright, you should review his free book on magnetism. I already did that. I did a video on Ken Wheeler's book. I didn't go through the whole book, obviously, just glanced through it, and just because I said, look, I read this, it's all just quotes, it's ugly drawings, it doesn't make any sense, it's just gobbledygook. It's the same as his videos. There's no difference between the videos and the book. It's the same junk. There's just nothing there. There's no rational argument. Alright, so Don Lincoln at Superior Mind. Why is this above his comment? Oh, okay, it's the response. So these are all responses to Don's comment. Alright, so I guess I will go to the drawing before I deal with this comment. Yeah, that's what I'll do. And see if I can make it simpler. Even simpler. Alright, should be back. Alright, so let's start with just two elements of the quanta of the photon. So these are the two elements and the frequency. So this would be the first bit, this would be the second bit, there would be a third bit and a fourth bit and a fifth bit, that kind of thing. So this is your wavelength here. One of those arrow lengths is a wavelength. So the idea is now this is going to encounter a atom moving this way. Alright, opposing it. So what's going to happen is, let me see if I drew this right. Okay, so what's going to happen first is the black bit is going to now be possessed. Okay, it's going to stop moving forward, but it's going to go into a trap. So it's going to go into a trap. Its motion is going to be nullified. It's going to go circular. So it has no more forward motion, but it will be carried, the trap will be carried by the hydrogen atom to a new position, and then this piece of energy will be now again released to go the speed of light. That's the simple diagram. So I'm going to cut out everything here to make it as simple as possible. And what we're going to say is the amount of time it's in the trap is exactly the wavelength. So if this is 600 nanometers, oh, I don't want to get to the, let's do frequency. It's, well, whatever the amount of seconds it would be that is this wavelength in time, that's the amount of time. So as soon as this one gets out of the trap, this one goes into the trap. So we do that just for simplification, just to make it so we don't have partials. All right. So what's going to happen is this photon is going to go in. The first one gets to the atom will absorb it, and the photon will, at we'll just say at this contact point, it will now be carried by the atom that way. All right. And at that point, right, that means the atom now is going to release this photon. It's carried the trap. It carried the trap, okay, to this location. It's now going to release this black bit this way. And the red bit now goes into the trap at this location, and it now will travel with the trap. In the trap, the red bit's going to go this way. And so I would argue that this is all proportional so far, that this is a correct way to look at it. While this one's free now, moving this way, this one is in the trap, and for the length of this wavelength, this one will be in the trap. So these distances are proportional, and then it won't be until it reaches, you know, this point time-wise, where now this red one will be released. And so in the time it's, so this is going to be its starting position, and it will go this much to get back to here, and in that time this one will have gone this much. So now you can see that this is now the new sequence. Okay, this one has traveled twice as far, so the black line is now this long, and the red line meets here. Okay, and what's going to happen is if we put a third photon in this equation, all right, what's going to happen is this red line is going to go this much, whoops, but it's going to go more once this blue one goes this way. So when the blue one's going this way, this red one's going to go this extra. So this will always add up to a longer wavelength, and the length of the longer wavelength will be the length of the time. Okay, this length, the time it spends in the trap. So the time it spends in the trap is this length. That's how much will be added to the frequency. So when you think about the first one leaving, think about this being the extra delay. That this is the consequence of it going backwards, is that this extra bit. So the first one, if there was a target here, and I wasn't doing any of this extra bit, if it was just one bit, okay, it would arrive at a delay equal to the amount of time it was in the trap plus the amount of time it takes to go back the distance the trap took you backwards. If you have to make up the distance it puts you back, the amount of time it takes to make up that distance, that will be the extra distance. So you'll have the distance you in the delay plus the distance you have to undo from being sent backwards. So the delay, if I had just one little quanta going through, it would still have, if it's not moving, it would get here at t. If it's this atom's moving, it'll get here at t plus, okay, more distance, the time it takes to go that distance, delta d or whatever you want to say. So it's obviously going to be delayed more, the first one, because it has to travel more distance. because it has to redo distance it already did, because it's going to end up going backwards. So you can see it's redoing distance it already did right here. Right here, it's going backward. It has to do that distance a second time. It has to travel that segment a second time. That's the extra added to the wavelength, and it's added to each one. So even if you have a blue one here, the blue one's going to do exactly the same thing, and this will be the added bit of the time it was in the trap. I really don't think there's a way to make it simpler. I really don't think there is. Alright. Yeah, I can't, you know. I think I've done all I can to explain it. This, if you just calculate it, is distance moved in these lines. It's linear. It's all in one dimension, so you can't get too confused. And clearly, it backtracks against distance it already went, and it has to travel that same part of the road again. And traveling that part of the road again means it has to delay your arrival an extra amount, and it delays the arrival for each one by this extra amount, and each one contains the extra amount, which ends up being part of its wavelength. So the wavelength goes from this to this. We'll see. Alright, I'll be back. Alright, so to the comments. Don Lincoln. So you couldn't provide any counter argument to the analysis at 1612. Again, I'm in a sense refusing, because I pointed out how this is the argument, okay? The fact is, we've used all these metaphors. Moving the horse, back away from the starting line. We've used moving the store further from your house. I just illustrated again. That has to be explained. So I'm just saying there's nothing else to explain. You have to explain how you do extra distance. You have to go over the same path you already went over, and how that doesn't increase the wavelength, the distance between the actual objects. It has to increase their distance. So there's no counter argument. Again, any motion in this direction just changes when the delay happens. It doesn't change what happens during the delay. I made the point. I said it doesn't matter whether you have a car accident going to work or leaving work. The delay in your schedule is going to be the same. You're not going to arrive at home at the right time, regardless of where it happens. Fuck. Presuming you have to stay at work at a constant number of hours. Alright. Then you outright ignore and deny the conclusions at the end of 1915. So again, you can't quote anything. You really have the expectation. I go back to the video and press and go find 1915. I mean, it's just kind of obnoxious, this expectation you people have. But yeah, I'll do it. What the hell? 1915. So the big conclusions that I've already dealt with repeatedly. All right, 1915. Oops.
So wow, says you. The end result is delta L exactly as claimed. No bullshitting here. I am backing everything up. You didn't back anything up.
Yeah, right. So I'm supposed to respond to his formula where he's not accounting for the fact that you're retracing distance you've already done. He's not counting the fact that the frickin' hydrogen atom is moving away from the target. It's creating more distance for the wavelengths to have to fill. The frequency, there's 4 items. The 4 items have to fill a certain amount of distance. You're increasing the amount of distance they have to fill. It seems just kind of obvious they have to spread out. They have to be spread out. So yes, I did address it. There's nothing to address. There's no formula for this. He's just making one up, saying I'm going to use C for this and V for this, But I'm not going to account for the fact that, as I've stated, there's no forward motion while there's backward motion. You can't have the photon still moving forward when it's in the trap. It has to be motionless while it's in the trap. It has no momentum when it's in the trap. It's zero. It's doing this. It's not going anywhere. 0 miles per hour. It's moving the speed of light, but it's gaining 0 miles per hour. This way. Where's that in his formula? Oh, that's right. It's not in his formula. Oh, shit. Okay. And then you block the person. Well, I didn't block him. So you see, you can't even get the details right. I said I should block him because this is a preposterous waste of time. But the fact is, I didn't block him. I deleted the comment. You can see me in the video hit the trash can icon. I deleted it. I didn't block him. Shutting down any dialogue that is counter to your narrative. So again, any dialogue you mean that now has wasted 5 videos to explain elementary mathematics. I mean, motion in one direction, motion in another direction, motion back in the other direction. It really shouldn't be that complicated. Now, maybe it's my bad that I can't figure out how to illustrate it so perfectly that you get it. But yes, clearly to me, there's no denying what's taking place as described. The thing moves, the thing stops moving, and it just doesn't restart again from where it was. It restarts from a distance further from the target, meaning it has to retrace the steps. Damn. Alright. Attributing motivated reasoning to people you don't like is nothing but fallacious. So, attributing motivated reasoning, again, what is that crap? I didn't attribute anything to this stupid monk guy except saying, gee, he's wasting a lot of my fucking goddamn time. Gee, he's a fucking idiot. What other motive did I imply he has? When I talk to these other people have been trolls for years. Years of shitty comments. Rude. Obnoxious comments. So again, you just can't follow along at all, can you? You can't get the story straight, right? So just like the physicist you're defending, you can't tell the history correctly. You make accusations that aren't true. You claim evidence you don't fucking have. So fuck you. Alright, anyway. Nothing fallacious. Like, okay, people you don't like is attributing motivated reasoning. It's just, that doesn't even make any sense. Everybody's reasoning is motivated, yes. To people you don't like is nothing but fallacious nonsense that doesn't engage with the dialogue. There's no dialogue here. I mean, I'm sort of explaining how, to me this is just basic stuff. Pliers, screwdriver, wrench, the basic tools. And he's basically telling me that it doesn't matter whether the atom is moving. I can go inside an atom, I can jump on a train, and while I'm on the train, there's no Doppler shift. Okay, even though the train's moving, we're just going to deny that it's happening. I get off the train, there's no Doppler shift. It doesn't matter, there's no Doppler shift anywhere. I'm arguing simply that, no, while you're trapped in the train, while you're on the fucking train, in the atom, you're Doppler shifting. That's what's going to happen to you, because you're going backwards. You're creating more distance. And it's just a fucking goddamn fact that you fuckheads, you're the one with the preposterous resistance to the simple reasoning. Anyway. So, superior mind attempts to make it understood, I guess. Matter is made of parts moving at c. Velocity is how many offset units it travels in a direction per cycle. Well, that's, frankly, yeah, I can see where somebody's going to trip over that. The point is that the velocity is something imposed on you. You collect it. It changes you. You store it. You have it. Something that has velocity, it's in there. If we had the right microscope, we could see their velocity. It's in there. All right. Obviously, if it travels 3 units right instead of 2, then the force moving the opposite direction will interact 1 unit sooner. sooner doesn't matter. Again, it doesn't matter whether you have the car accident sooner or later. What we're talking about is what happens during the accident. And what happens during the accident is you jump back 3 spaces. Likewise, if the force-bit photon coming from the opposite direction must travel an extra unit. Coming from the opposite must travel. Okay, if you draw this on paper, which I have attempted to do now 4 times, you can see the shift of frequency relative to the direction. It's actually incredibly simple. Yes, to me it seems it's incredibly simple. The idea, again, to me the illustrations make it even easier to understand. Again, if the store moves further away from your house, you've got to concede the extra distance. If the horse, I pick up the horse and I carry him further away from the finish line, you've got to concede he's got to run more distance now. I mean, damn. Alright. Don. Superior mind. The post seems to have been hidden. I don't know what he's talking about. Not on my intent, so I'll repost this part. Okay, I don't know what it was, but... Okay, please make an effort to explain your premises. What are you referring to when you say it? There's only 2 its here. There's the quanta bits. They're it1, it2, it3, it4. And there's a hydrogen atom. Hydrogen atom. So, HA. HA. What are the steps in your scenario? Well, I mean, the steps are there. It has a frequency going in, bang, 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 and it leaves going bang, 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 because it all has to travel more distance. I would be interested in your incredibly simple proposition, but you need to make it clear what you're referring to begin with. He's referring to this thought experiment regarding what happens to energy when it goes into a moving object. I don't resort to insults or illogical dismissals, and don't resort to. Yeah. Again, where did he insult you in here? Sorry, I didn't see that. Hopefully you can see this. I mean, no offense, by the way. Well, it's pretty offensive. You just basically said he's a wife beater when you have no evidence that he beat any wives. So, fuck you for that. Horse shit. Obviously, if it travels 3 units right instead of 2, then the force moving in the opposite direction will interact 1 unit sooner. Well, you just keep ignoring. This isn't about units when they interact. It's about what happens during the interaction. During the interaction, the photon has no forward movement. It's not moving anymore. It's not going the speed of light in a direction anymore. It's caught in a trap. And besides doing that, which is irritating, no doubt, okay, running your bicycle wheels and they're not hitting the ground, it's got to be a little bit irritating. On top of that, the bicycle is being pushed backwards. I mean, shit. Likewise, if the force-bit photon coming from the opposite direction must travel an extra unit, it must travel the distance it already traveled. I already ran up to the starting line. I got trapped, and the trap put me back, 20 feet from the starting line. So now I have to run all the way up to the starting line, and the other guy's running already. He left the starting line and is running. I've been put 20 feet back, and now I'm going to start running. It's kind of hopeless. Alright, if a photon and matter bit are moving towards each other, then the photon hits the matter bit sooner. So again, this isn't about hitting anything. That's just more distraction. I made it clear what happens. I'm arguing it's clear that when light travels through a medium, it is delayed in its progress. Okay, and that's the same as trapping it. That's the same as understanding it didn't really slow down, it just went in circles for a little while. If a photon is moving in the same direction as the matter bit, well, obviously that's not the scenario we're talking about. and is trying to catch up with it, then the photon hits the matter bit later. So again, it doesn't matter when the hit happens. That can't be relevant. The hit isn't changing anything. It's the fact that once you are in the atom, you're no longer going forward, and the atom is carrying you backward. Fuck. This is correct, and this is not in dispute. Well, I'm sorry, that's in dispute, that it makes any difference at all where I arbitrarily create the delay. Where in the cycle I decide to impose the trap, where I trap the little stupid mouse, doesn't fucking matter. The only part that matters is once he's trapped, he's going to be sent backwards relative to the position I trap him at. So it doesn't matter whether I trap him right when he starts and I trap him right there, or I trap him 2 feet from the finish line. It doesn't matter where I trap him. The point is once I do trap him, he's going to be sent backward. Fuck. The point with respect to the timestamps that I linked, I didn't see any links anywhere, is that, oh no, that's the stupid timestamps to the time codes to my video where I clearly read the shitty bullshit argument that has nothing again to do with my argument. So again, I think I'm entitled to have my questions asked first. And my question is, you really believe that it doesn't matter whether the atom's moving or not moving? Because we'll agree that there's no change in the frequency if the atom's not moving. And you're basically arguing it doesn't matter if it's moving. It doesn't change anything. And I think that's a preposterous statement. The point with respect to the timestamp that I linked is that you need to analyze the frequency shift proposed in more detail. I'm sorry, the detail's already been talked about and analogized in 5 different ways. Let's go to the Alice, Bob, and Charles analogy. Let's say A, B, and C are cycling from New York to Boston, so now he's changing it in a straight line at 30 miles an hour. Alice is behind, Bob in the middle, and Charles in front. So now you've changed their frickin' positions. Why? So Charles is in front. Let's say the distance between each one is 30 miles. This is the wavelength. They are on their trip to Boston. And so A, B is 30 miles. B to C is 30 miles. So so you did this backwards. So you have Charles in front. God damn it. Why did you put Charles in front? Why did you put number 3 instead of number 1? Why? At some point, someone snags Charles and his bicycle and drags him backward. Doesn't matter how fast, really, for 30 minutes. Yes, he's dragged backward some distance. Doesn't really matter whether it's a foot or 5,000 miles or 5 million miles. But yes, obviously we say he's dragged back 5 million miles. It's going to be really hard for you to say it can't change anything. All right, in the 30-minute time segment, Alice moves forward 30 miles an hour, 0.5 out of 15 miles. So he's not going to recognize that the point at which they're always additive. The distance from the target, the first person creates this much extra distance going backward. Then the next person creates this much more. And the next person creates this much more. Those all add up. The third person is experiencing a much longer distance from the target. Anyway, after the 30 minutes, the dist between A and B is kept the same. The distance between B and C is now 30 miles minus the distance traveled by B minus the distance traveled by C. So where do you have in here retracing the steps you already passed? Where do you have them running over the same road they already traveled? Oh yeah, it won't be in here. Next, the snatcher lets C go and A, B, C go on their constant 30 miles until this. I mean, there's no point, right? I mean, we've already done this, and this is a really bad analogy compared to the others. After 30 minutes, blah, 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 yeah, forget it. But of course, B is dragged away from C. I mean, it's really just the first one leaves right here. It leaves. While this one's going backwards. This one's moving the speed of light. This one's going the wrong direction. You can't understand how that can't possibly widen their separation. It's going the wrong way, and we'll have to retrace those steps. Well, whatever. Hopeless. Alright, so I'm not going to bother. This is, hopelessly convoluted. Alright, after the 30 minutes, the distance between A and B is now 30 miles plus the 15 miles plus the 5 miles. So you're sitting and putting an awful lot of distance between them. A was moving backward and B was moving forward, so they were moving apart. And again, there's no point in me saying it over and over again, but you have to recognize that the distance that the first person adds, the second person adds more distance. They don't just keep retracing the same part. They retrace a different part at a different distance. I mean, it really doesn't matter, but I mean, it's important to keep that clear. During the duration, B and C were moving at a constant speed, so the distance between them hasn't changed from the last moment, blah, blah, blah. And a snatcher goes backward, leaving A, B, and C to keep going on their trip. So again, they're just basically making, like I said, they're attempting to rationalize there's no Doppler shift on a train, when of course there is. I mean, you can't be on a moving object and not be Doppler shifting. So whenever something's in the trap, it's on the train and it's Doppler shifting. Because it's going the wrong fucking way, shithead. The result is there's just as much blue shifting as there is red shifting. There is, this is something to consider. I'm sorry, it's not reasonable. The red shifting, the blue shifting, again, isn't something where you actually change the frequency. It's how you're interpreting, how you're collecting it. Because you're moving. You're moving. Your motion is creating it. It's how you're picking it up. How you put something down is different than how you pick it up. I mean, receiving is different than emitting. So you can't use this argument that the frequency was different. Okay, that somehow the frequency was already smaller or bigger. And so the two compensate for each other. Because they can't. Alright, superior mind. By it, I meant the matter. Matter is made of trapped parts that move at c, and forces are also V equals c. But again, when they're in a trap, their velocity is still the speed of light, but they're not making any progress. They're going 0 miles an hour. They're not collecting any distance. Thus, they all move at the same sized units. Velocity of matter is the offset of units, an imbalance, if you will, in a direction. If the offset is 3 units per cycle towards incoming force bits and the force bits are 10 units apart, then for every 3 units of advancement the matter, there will be 10 units advancement of the force bits towards it, consequently 7 units of movement. Yeah, I'm sorry, all this stuff is just too difficult to put in your... I mean, I can't do this word problem in my head. Sorry. Not me, anyway. So, let's see. You can apply the same concept with positive or negative matter units, offset velocity, and the same indication or increase or decrease in photon interaction rate. So you have to analogize it to something. So you're better off with the car crash analogy or the going to the store analogy or whatever. What was the one I used? Horse race analogy. I'm not sure I understand how the analogy you present is actually analogous to what's being presented. Well, again, none of these arguments are getting to the point that while there's no forward movement by the photon, it's not just not moving forward, it's being sent backward, and you have to account for that. It's undeniable. And that's the difference between the atom being stationary and the atom moving. If the atom is stationary, then it's not moving backward, and so it's just a delay, so the frequency stays the same. But clearly, if it's moving backward, then the frequency has to change, because every single bit is going to experience having to rerun that piece of track. For example, the true distance between the incident force bits doesn't change. The emission of bits would also be uniform, but the frequency of emission would depend on the matter's velocity and energy level. When I have time, I'll try to think of how to express this in terms of this analogy structure. Well, I think you're just going to... you're going to be hopeless if you're going to say that the frequency was changed by the interaction, because it isn't. The interactions happen, it's put in a trap. You would almost say instantaneously. There's no process of being trapped. So there's no way you could say it's shifting something, because it goes into the trap as soon as it gets to the atom. And so it just doesn't matter where that happens, because the same thing's going to happen. It's just going to be sent backwards. I mean, it doesn't matter if we have the start of the race and I trap the horse 5 feet from the starting line or 5 feet from the finish line. It just couldn't possibly make a difference, because all that's going to happen is the horse is going to be not moving forward for a certain amount of time, and it's going to be sent backwards a certain amount of distance. And that distance you have to account for. Shit. Alright, Lincoln. Let's see. If the offset is 3 units per cycle towards the incoming force bits, and the force bits are 10 units apart, then okay, makes sense. So it made sense to him. Good for you. I couldn't follow. The matter bits go 3 units per cycle. The force bits go 10 units per cycle. I'm using cycle as a convenient time unit. Well, okay, but well, consequently, after 7 units of movement, there will be an interception for the first bit. Yes, so the first bit's going to, because the atom's moving, and because it moved the trap, and it forced the first bit to move extra distance, it will actually arrive at the target later than it should have. So it's going to arrive at the target later, which means it has already extended its wavelength. Okay. Even though it doesn't have one, right? I mean, the first bit, you're sort of arguing it doesn't really have a wavelength. Because the wavelength is the node thing. I mean, it doesn't have a wavelength till the second bit shows up to say, this is how far apart we are. But clearly, the extra delay is almost indicating to you that's the extra distance being added to each wavelength. The extra amount of time it takes for the first bit to get to the target because it went backwards and it had to retrace steps, that extra amount of time is actually the extra amount of wavelength that each bit will have added to it. There's no way to... Just don't know how to make it any clearer. Consequently, after 7 units of movement, there will be an interception for the first bit, and in the meantime, the other bits have had their time to advance 7 units and are still technically 10 units apart. And at this point, you've reset the original scenario, because when the matter advances another 3 units towards the 10-unit distance bit, it will intercept again in 7 units. Okay, so to parse this out, I imagine this on line with ruler markings. Oh, brother. A ruler analogy. Start at t equals 0. The matter bit is at x equals 0. The force bits are at x equals 10, 20, 30. Okay. Step 1. From what I understand, at t1, the matter bit is x equals 3, and the force bits are x equals 3, 13, 23. At this instant, the matter bit traps the force bit, the first bit. Have I summarized step 0 to 1 correctly so far? I don't know. Another question. For how long does the matter bit hold the force bit? It doesn't matter. Any amount of time will be distance. So if it's for an hour, then it's 5,000 miles, and if it's for a second, then it's a few nanometers. But the point is, that part doesn't matter. I say make it exactly the same length as the wavelength, and then you can make this math a lot easier. It is critical to have these details correct. Well, those details are not critical. Make up any number. Just say it moves backward 10 feet. It doesn't matter how far the store moves away from your house, whether the store moves 10 feet away from your house or it moves 500 miles from your house. It just couldn't matter, because whatever amount it is, that's going to be added to your wavelength. Okay. All right, so I think that's the last comment in the string. But it's okay. I mean, part of me says this really shouldn't be happening, but I sort of understand it, because even talking all this light clock stuff, and then you get into the Michelson-Morley thing, and the mirrors are moving, and the glass is moving, and everything's moving, and you're trying to figure out, well, where exactly does the photon reflect? I mean, how does it reflect off a moving mirror? I mean, how does a photon reflect off a mirror that's moving? You know, it does get kind of complicated. And how does it, how does the rebound happen? Because like the airplane analogy, if the thing is moving, then the energy needed to have the reflection, the energy has to be more energy out. It's moving away, it needs more energy to have the same velocity going out, kind of an argument. So somewhere this mechanics has to create that extra velocity. And how can it create it? Okay, where does it get it from if the mirror's moving? You need extra momentum. And the only way you can get the extra momentum is to create more time, right? Like a pulley system. You're taking a heavy weight and cutting it into little pieces of weight, right? You're taking 100 pounds and turning it into 10 pounds, 10 pounds, 10 pounds, 10 pounds, so you can lift it. And the same thing would have to happen with a reflection, because there wouldn't be enough momentum to reflect. So there has to be longer amounts of time to create more penetration for there to be a big enough rebound. That kind of thing. I'm just saying, so all this stuff does get a little bit technical. But it does seem like the principles are so simple that, this is just, where are you going? You're going plus, plus, plus. Then you go back. All right, and now you have to go plus, plus, just to get back to where you were. That's pretty easy. All right. You keep talking about the second horse being dragged back. They're all dragged back. The first horse gets dragged back, the second horse gets dragged back, the third horse gets dragged back. And the amount you're dragged back, the time you have to waste running the same track you already ran, that's the increase in the wavelength. But you forget that the first horse was also dragged back earlier. Yeah, no, I didn't forget. Okay. It made its wavelength longer. It had to travel more distance, which means, it took longer to reach the target. And why did it take longer to reach the target? Because its wavelength is bigger. Shit. While the first horse was being dragged back, the second and other horses were running forward at normal speed. Correct, but irrelevant. Now when the second horse, you're only counting what's happening while they're in the trap. That's where all the action happens, when something's in the trap. When nothing's in the trap, nothing's happening. Doesn't matter. There's nothing to calculate. The only period you calculate is while things are in traps. All right. Anyway, while the first horse was being dragged back, the second and other horses were running forward at normal speed. Now, when the second horse is being dragged back, the first horse is making up for the lost time and lost distance. So recognize again, the key point is right here where the first horse is now going, it went back, right? It did this going back thing. It's released at this point. So this is, you could say, bang, that's the start. And so what's happening at that start? Well, the first horse is now going the speed of light. This thing is in the trap going this way. So when this one is here, this one is here. Okay, it hasn't even started to go forward yet. So this has already made this whole length of distance, okay, while this one is going all the way back here. And so by the time this one gets back to here, this one has gone here. And that's your increase. So you have the old wavelength plus the distance moved in the trap. And that will be the new wavelength. And that's your result right there. Alright, the first horse is making up lost time and lost distance, which he was dragged back earlier. So again, you're conceding that he's making up. So that means he will arrive at the destination with a longer delay. So you're at least conceding that if the atom is moving and not stationary, there'll be a longer delay than just the time in the trap. The time in the trap will create some delay. But you're conceding, right, by this argument, that the going back part is going to create more delay in the first horse getting to the finish line. And if you can concede that you've increased the distance the first one has to travel, then you've already essentially conceded that's the increase in the wavelength. And every horse will have that same scenario. I can just erase the word 1 and put a 2 there and a 3, and then erase the 2 and 3 and put a 3 and 4. It doesn't matter now. Every single horse will be doing the same thing, creating a bigger amount of time, distance it has to travel. Okay. Which he was dragged back earlier. By the time the second horse is released, the first horse just made up the lost distance he was dragged back. So, wrong. It doesn't matter. He's already going the speed of light in the forward direction. So the point is how far is he getting from the second bit? That's the wavelength. The wavelength is going to be created by how far away this one gets from this one. Okay, it's how far does the black one get away from the red one. And clearly, it's going forward when this one's going backward. And then when this one's going forward, it's going forward some more. So now this is the new wavelength. By the time the second horse is released, the first horse just made up the distance of the regular. So now the two horses are exactly the same distance apart that they were before being dragged back. Well, that's just horse shit. I'm sorry. You can't draw that. Draw it. I'm sorry. There's a point where you have to draw it. Show me. Because I can't make these lines do that. Okay? They're not going to do that. This one can't. This horse can't possibly be making up its time. All right. I mean, obviously it is right here. You can see it. This is the distance it went back. This is the distance it went forward. But at the same time it was going forward, this one was going back. Do you get it? So when this one is going this extra distance, this one goes back to this distance. So here is the new wavelength. It's twice as big as the original wavelength. It's right there in front of you. It's twice as much. The black line is now twice as long. The red line will be twice as long. The blue line will be twice as long. Alright. Oh, it's the Woot again. I'm not supposed to read Woot comments. But we'll let it slide this time. But we will delete it because, like I said, he just doesn't deserve courtesy. Because he has shown no respect to our manners in the past. Alright. So, I think that's all you can do. Is beat the dead horses. The tired horses. They're running so much more distance. Yeah, it's just cruel to keep beating them. So there's a point where I'll give up, I think. I think I should have given up like 3 videos ago, but... And I think... I've done all I can. I really think this is it. I mean, I really don't think I should have to just keep going on and on. I don't, well, whatever. We'll see. If I come up with another analogy, then I'll try. But frankly, this is it, I think. Okay, there's just no more to say. I'll just refer you to past videos and say, no, until you explain how this is broken, what part of this drawing is incorrect? Where did I make a mistake? Where's the mistake here? Okay, when this is going forward, this is going backward. There's no mistake there. This has to make up the lost distance, so it's going forward. While it's going forward, this is T1, this is T2, these are two different times. It's not doing this at the same time, so this is one T element, this is another T element. And what happened while this was going backward and then forward, this was going forward and forward. I mean, how can you undo that? Okay, that's it. Situation hopeless, but not serious. Something like that. Movie title. So, till the next time.